So, hello again, everyone. Our last session for today is a roundtable discussion about taking stock of GRP initiatives around Southeast Asia. I would like to hand over to Mark to open the roundtable session. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome to our final session for today. In every GRPN, an important part of the day has always been the opportunity for members of the network from various ASEAN countries to share recent developments, experiences and initiatives in their countries. And we have a number of different experiences to share with you this afternoon. This is also an opportunity, once the speakers have had their opportunity to speak, for people from the floor to share experiences and initiatives if they would like to as well. So please feel free to do so if you have interesting developments from your country to share with us. I will now hand over to Dr. Salutorn Thongming Suk, who is Research Fellow at Thailand Development Research Institute, to moderate the session and to introduce the panelists.
Thank you. Hello. Hello. Oh, sorry, a little bit of technical issues.
We have a microphone issue.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Co-Chair, for your opening remarks and also for setting the stage for what promises to be an engaging and fruitful discussion. First of all, it's my privilege to moderate today's roundtable discussion for the 8th meeting of ASEAN-OECD Good Regulatory Practices Network. And I think it's a very pivotal session for us all today. And in this session, we will have 4 presentations from our 4 distinguished speakers. Firstly, Mr. Daniel Trnka, Deputy Head of the Regulatory Policy Division at the OECD Public Governance Directorate. And then we have Ms. Chaisai Wongpichet, who serves as the Legal Counsel. Sorry. Hello. Okay, I'm sorry, I will continue. In the Law Reform Division, Office of the Council of the State. And next we have Dr. Min Ho Lee, our Senior Research Fellow at the Office of Regulatory Policy Research, Korea Institute of Public Administration. And last but not least, Ms. Marbida L. Marbida, Director of the Better Regulations Office of the Philippines. And after the speaker presentation, I will open the floor for all participants and delegates for participating and asking questions to the presenter. And your insights, experience, and also perspective are truly invaluable for our common understanding and for shaping the future trajectory of our good regulatory practices in the near future. So with this in mind, let us commence with the presentation. So first, Mr. Trnka will be presenting on the upcoming OECD's country project in Thailand, a topic of great significance as we look to enhance the regulatory framework within our region. So Mr. Trnka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And sorry you have to say sit separated from us.
Okay.
There are too many speakers. Yes, we didn't come to Bangkok on an 11-hour flight via Amsterdam just because of this one-day meeting. We actually have more work to do here, and I have the pleasure to walk you through our ongoing cooperation with the government of Thailand and with the Office of the Council of State. In particular, It is actually a second phase of the OECD-Thailand cooperation in the area of good regulatory practices or regulatory policy and governance, as we call it, on the OECD side. And very briefly, maybe I will take you through the first phase, which took place before. Most of the work was done before the pandemic, luckily enough, so we had the pleasure to visit Thailand several times, or my colleagues did. And we worked together with OCS on elaborating, drafting, helping them to draft an overarching better regulation strategy or a policy, and actually an action plan for its implementation. We engage a lot in outreach activities. We organize awareness-raising events, capacity building workshops together with peers from some OECD countries, including Australia and Germany, for example. And we talked to a lot of public officials in the administration, but also to outside stakeholders to persuade them that regulatory policy is actually useful and it can be useful for their work. We understand that for many people across the administration, not just in Thailand, but in all OECD and non-OECD countries, regulatory policy presents sort of an additional level of administrative burdens for them, for their work. However, we always say that if you do it properly, it can actually lead to better results. It can lead to better laws and regulations. It can help the country to better achieve government's goals and objectives. And in many countries, it leads to also reducing the number of potential amendments of laws and regulations. We've heard so many examples from many countries of laws and regulations that had to be amended several times, even during 1 year, because they just didn't make it right on the first time they adopted those laws and regulations. And we think that basing regulations and laws on evidence, on available information and data and scientific expertise, and talking to stakeholders during the process can actually help to much better results, higher quality laws and regulations. So that was one of our goals, to persuade public officials across the administration that it can be useful for their work. We work with OCS on sort of creating or establishing their new mandate in the area of regulatory oversight. And we promise to come back to the GRP guidance that was published in tandem with the 2019 Act to ensure that these are being used and align them even closer to international best practices published in the OECD. And if you are interested, the report you can see on the picture, the cover page you can see on the slide, is available on the OECD website, and we would be happy to share it with anyone who's interested. Do not hesitate to send me an email. But this was phase one. This is now over, and now we are glad that we are entering phase two. These are actually two projects combined together. As part of this second stage, we will carry out sort of a monitoring review. So we will look at to what extent our recommendations from the report published in 2020 are being implemented. You don't have to worry. We are not here to criticize. We are really here to help, to provide advice. We are always happy to see if our recommendations are put into practice, but we also know that it's not always very easy, and it might take time to actually implement all of them. So we just want to look at whether our recommendations in the area of regulatory impact assessment, which was our primary focus in phase one, but also stakeholder consultation or stakeholder engagement, regulatory delivery, enforcement and inspections, ex-post reviews of the regulatory stock, to what extent these recommendations are being implemented, and maybe to provide more recommendations, a little bit fine-tuned to where to go in the future. We were also asked by OCS to develop some guidance for prioritization, because obviously it's not possible to do a full-fledged cost-benefit analysis on every single piece of legislation, every single piece of regulation. None of the OECD countries has a capacity for that, and that's why there must be some kind of prioritization, thresholds, if you will. We want to provide some advice on that, to focus on those regulations and those laws with the most significant potential impacts, but also to those laws that are based on the priorities of the government. Because in some countries, they want to prioritize those laws that will have, for example, something we discussed today, environmental impacts. So it is obligatory to carry out regulatory impact assessment for all laws that will have significant environmental impacts. In some countries, social impacts are taken as important because countries are fighting poverty. So they set an obligation to really do more detailed analysis for regulations in the social area. We want to help the country to improve evidence-based decision-making, so to base really laws and regulations on evidence. And again, we will be building capacities and ownership inside the administration. What are the key steps of our projects? Well, we will start tomorrow actually with a capacity building workshop. And tomorrow we will specifically talk about regulatory oversight in the morning and stakeholder engagement in the afternoon. And I'm happy to say that we will be joined by the delegation of New Zealand, but also by 2 additional peers, one from the United Kingdom, another one from Austria. So we are bringing in OECD practitioners who have direct experience with implementing good regulatory practices in their daily life. They can share their experience, but they can also talk about some bad practice examples and obstacles they have to overcome in their work, which is always very, very useful to hear from your counterparts that they are facing similar issues as you do in your country. We will continue next week with what we call fact-finding missions. We are trying to meet with as many stakeholders as we can, with ministries, with external stakeholders, including business representatives and chambers of commerce. We want to get the information from them to complement what we already have gathered through a questionnaire, when we in the OECD are really good in producing questionnaires. So we did one for this project as well. This gave us a basic information about how the situation looks on paper, but usually in direct meetings with stakeholders you find out about the situation in practice, which might be slightly different from the de jure situation, if you will, from what is written on paper. And based on that, we will produce a set of recommendations, as I said. We will also provide a manual for prioritization, and we will carry out some pilot exercise in the first quarter of the next year. We will also finalize it before in the second quarter of the year, and I will continue. We should have some preliminary recommendation also in the second quarter of the next year, which will be followed by a second mission where we will try to maybe test our recommendations with the Thai government, because believe it or not, sometimes even we in the OECD do not make things right the first time. So we want to consult them to what extent our recommendations will be feasible, will be applicable in the Thai system, because we want to make tailor-made recommendations. And we will finalize the report and the recommendations, and the report will be discussed at the OECD Regulatory Policy Committee. The Regulatory Policy Committee are representatives of OECD countries responsible for regulatory policy that gather in Paris twice a year. And this is one of the biggest advantages of working with the OECD, not just to work with the Secretariat, us, but also that you and your experience is discussed by practitioners from countries such as US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, but when it comes to regulatory policy, slightly less developed countries that might be only also starting with implementing good regulatory principles from, I don't know, Latin America or Eastern Europe. So you get an advice from well-developed countries, but also from countries that might be at a similar stage as you are. This will happen in the fourth quarter of 2024. And finally, we will officially launch the report through a conclusion workshop in Thailand before the end of the next year. So as you can see, a lot of work ahead of us, but we are very much looking forward to this work. not just because we like to visit Thailand, but also because this is always very interesting for us to see how our recommendations are implemented in practice, what works, what doesn't, to take lessons for the future. I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be more than happy to respond to them.
So thank you very much, Mr. Trnka, for your detailed overview of the OECD Thailand cooperation, especially in drafting and implementing and overseeing better regulatory strategy. This is truly illuminating. Moving forward with our next presentation from Ms. Jaisai Wongpichet. Today she will look into an essential aspect of Thailand regulatory framework, the proportionality and threshold test, and this topic is particularly pertinent as it sheds the light on how Thailand balances the regulatory objectives with the interest and also impact on their stakeholder, which is the one very important consideration in developing any regulatory efficient and effective regulatory framework. So Ms. Wongpichet, we eagerly await your presentation and the insight you will share on this crucial aspect of Thailand regulatory environment. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Swadika. Actually, I think my presentation might answer already some of the questions that Daniel has posed. I'm actually a bit nervous with the results. Can I have the presentation up, please? Oh, I can't see it on the screen. Anyways, so RIA, or Regulatory Impact Assessment, is not a new concept in Thailand. It's actually been around for about 30, 40 years maybe, but it's only been formalized quite recently. So in about the past 6 years, when we had the new constitution. So RIA, or the concept of GRP, so to speak, is kind of enshrined in our constitution in section 77. So the Thai colleagues here will be quite sick of hearing the word section 77 at this point. Essentially, the section put an obligation on the state to kind of consult with stakeholders and assess any possible or potential impacts if they were to enact a law, so every law. Also, an obligation to disclose the results of whatever that has been done regarding that proposal to the public. And it also kind of introduced the concept of kind of a legal ecosystem. So it introduces the evaluation of its outcomes. So every certain period of time, all legislations have to go under review. And so following that section, we introduced the Rules on Legislative Drafting and Evaluation of the Outcomes of the Law Act. That was in 2019. The name is very long in Thai and in English. So usually the nickname we call it is the 77 Act, or Phalabor 77 นะคะ. So this act kind of lays down the principles and the steps of the process of drafting legislation on the executive side. So it requires that when you're preparing kind of a proposal for a draft legislation or a bill, you have to conduct RIA, so RIA, as we call it in Thai, and conduct consultation. And every 5 years, once those legislations have come into force, every 5 years we have to go through an ex-post evaluation, and that has to be done in conjunction with consultation as well. And all of those things that's been done has to be published and disclosed on at least on the central system that we've established. You can kind of see the logo there, and if you go on, I think law.go.th, you can see all the proposals and all the projects that all the agencies have kind of come up with, and some that didn't quite succeed are also still on there as well. So who needs to do all this? So The scope of RIA requirements currently is on all draft legislations proposed by the executive branch. So every government agency that want to propose legislation, but of course this doesn't apply to an emergency decree. And as of I think October last year, October 2022, all draft subordinate rules which contain licensing requirements, so permits, notifications, anything that you need to come into contact with, that the public has to come into contact with the government, or rules with expectations of compliance, essentially, has to also undergo the same requirements. So this means that all proposals and all for legislations and subordinate rules have to go through the same standard form. That's 8 questions and 4 additional questions if depending on the question, the content of what's in your proposal. So that takes you through, what is the issue, what are the issues you're trying to solve, what are the potential impacts, direct impact, indirect impact, environmental impact, social impact, and also ask the agency to kind of plan out how they are going to enforce, or how they are going to ensure the delivery, successful delivery of that regulation or legislation. And next to that is also consultation and disclosure requirements. In the Act, it only requires 15 days online, and we get complaints all the time that it's not enough, and we agree that it's not enough, but you can do more than 15 days. This is the minimum days for online on the central platform that I mentioned earlier. So usually online consultation lasts a lot longer, and also that will be done with kind of interviews or seminars or kind of conferences like this as well. So let's have a look, maybe take stock of what's been happening in the past maybe 4 years. So I only went through until 2018, mainly because I ran out of space on the PowerPoint. But before we introduce this Act, the 77 Act, generally we have about 50 to 50-ish new legislation published each year. 2019 is a bit of a odd year because we had a new constitution, so with a lot of replacing older legislations or updating legislations as well. The yellow line that I underlined there is actually when we first introduced the new RIA requirements. That was kind of a prelude to the Act, and that was in the form of a cabinet kind of resolution. So it didn't really quite have the same kind of legal backing or foundation as it does now. And nothing changed, no numbers dropped, kind of stayed the same. And then we introduced the Act in 2019, quite late 2019, 2020, and the number dropped quite significantly. And since then it's been kind of coming up slowly. Last year was 25 new legislations, and this year, because we had a change of government, so only 12 new legislations, but all were amendments, so no new introductions of different rules. But what's interesting is that we have the same number of proposals that are coming into the OCS. So all the proposals that comes through OCS has to be accompanied with the draft, consultation results, and RIA. And only about, I would say, 5% of the RIA reports that we get have quite significant quantitative analysis as part of the report. And the numbers of proposals didn't really go down, but we get a lot of complaints with time constraints, resources constraints. So I think in a way this is kind of still didn't quite change kind of the ownership or the understanding or the RIA culture within our agencies as much as we'd like to, or as much as we expected that would happen after we introduced the Act. Yes. So what are the pain points that we often get through going out, doing trainings and getting phone calls and emails? The number one is time and resources constraints. So as I said earlier, all draft proposal for legislations and regulations go through the same form. So not all draft proposals have the same impact or potential impact on the people. Most of the legislations actually are quite kind of housekeeping, internal governmental affairs that don't really impact the businesses or the public. So it's very difficult for agencies to actually even answer those fully, all the forms, even if they want to. And that leads on to the next pain point, which is the lack of quantitative analysis and lack of data. So we try to introduce kind of standard cost model as well for to be incorporated into RIA. And what we found mostly is that the government agency are able to do kind of using standard cost model when it comes to planning out or the expected kind of budget that they would need or the expected impact on the government for enforcing or planning on delivering that draft proposal because they have the data or they have access to the data. Whereas on the impact on the public or impact on kind of expected compliance and all that, because it's only mainly on draft proposals that are legislations. Generally, it lays down kind of the main principles, so it's very difficult even for agencies to fully kind of grasp or translate what that would mean in terms of compliance and the day-to-day steps of what a company would need to do or a person or an individual would need to do when the draft, if the legislation gets passed through and gets published. So this raises really two points. So is it efficient? We get asked that all the time, even just 1 year after we roll out the act. Is it efficient? Is the results worth kind of the burden and the headache of agencies having to go through kind of filling out all the forms, all the 12 questions, and having to do online consultations when it's things that don't really relate to the public? As we have to have legislations on kind of medals and things like that, things that are quite housekeeping and doesn't really impact the public, needs to go through this as well. So that's number one pain points, and the second one is the effectiveness. So where are the burdens really? That's kind of the question. Are we really reducing or filtering through the burdens if we're placing it at the legislation draft step, or is it more at the ministerial regulations or the subordinate rules? So in Thai, we have the phrase which is it scratching the itch? So, is this act or is the system right now scratching the itch? Is it improving the better quality of the legislation or reducing the burden? The graph that I have on the slide here is kind of show the number of ministerial regulations that we had before. So each year we introduced about 250 on average new ministerial regulations, but we introduced after the introduction of the extending the requirement of RIA onto subordinate rules, that number dropped to 100. We still have a few weeks to go for 2023, so I'm not sure if that's jumping up or not, but hopefully not. Oh, okay. So that leads to why, kind of all the pain points that leads to why we are looking into introducing the threshold test into the Thai system. The threshold test is kind of essentially a filter that filters through kind of or categorizes different type of proposals, whether it be legislation or regulations, that may not need to go through the same kind of one-size-fit-all form that we have right now. This is so that we can streamline our RIA and consultation process to better target our efforts and the time and resources that we have to proposals that have potentially significant impact on the people or on the public. And And looking at kind of international standards, I think there are kind of two ways that we may look into exploring, into introducing into the system, which is one is kind of going by type, so the type of maybe impact, if it's particularly impacting competition, health, or environment, or we could go look at the level of estimated impact. So if I'm not mistaken, maybe my South Korean colleague could also correct me if I'm wrong, but in South Korea, you can, if you have more than, if you have expected impact more than $10 million, then you have to conduct long-form RIA. Or if the regulation impacts more than 1 million people, then that has to go through kind of full, more rigorous impact analysis process. Or in the Australian case, they have the no more than minor impact threshold. So those are the kind of the options that we're exploring with the OECD at the moment in the project that Daniel has mentioned, on how to maybe introduce a filter in some way for us to make better use of our resources and make sure that our regulation scratch the itch, so to speak. So yeah, I will be happy to take any questions, or if you, I think we'll see some of our familiar faces on next week as well for a fact-finding mission. So please feel free to give them your honest opinions. We won't be in the room. We'll have a translator, and we won't be in the room, so you don't need to worry. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wong Pichet, for your comprehensive presentation and for highlighting the significant strides Thailand has made in implementing the GRP and also the RIA concepts. Next, let's turn our attention to another important perspective in the realm of regulatory policy. Dr. Min Ho Lee brings with him the wealth of experience and knowledge, particularly from South Korean perspective. Today, he will share with us a recent study conducted in Korean administration, focusing on the practices of the IRC application. So, Dr. Lee, we are keen to learn from your findings and experiences. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I just pressed the start button, my timer. I'm Dr. Min Ho Lee from South Korea, and my presentation is about comprehensive and empirical analysis on IRC application in Korean regulatory policy system. We have talked about a lot of challenges but it's quite challenging project to me, because in every international meeting on regulatory policy, we also talk about IRC, but before then, I have not many interest on that because there have been already lots of domestic issues. So we cannot much put interest on other countries' ideas. But actually, Korea is some kind of developing countries with taking a catch-up approach. So we have a lot of foreign studies, but we think about the IRC related with these foreign studies. And about these days, I think it's according to Linda's expression, I thought we had not IRC DNA. However, IRC idea have become one of the principles of current regulatory policy management, and especially in this year, OECD RPC published the recommendation on IRC application in regulatory policy management for our OECD member countries. And I discussed about this situation with my colleagues and public officials, and I plan to a research project to examine the current situation of IRC application and to suggest a policy agenda to facilitate IRC in Korean regulatory policies management. Yeah, actually, in fact, I finished the 300 pages research report last month, and so I'd like to share lots of my research results as much as possible, but I got only 10 minutes, so I need to skip a lot. Yeah, first part is about increased importance of IRC in these days, and thanks to Linda, I can skip this part. Important thing. Yeah. This page is about, this slide shows the evaluation by OECD on Korean regulatory policy management system. At least according to application of LEA and stakeholder engagement, Korea is located in the top rank of regulatory policy management. So public officials in Korea, RIC, proud of this result. However, in the perspective of ISC, lots of OECD members could not show sufficient evidence of ISC application. And Korean government seems to be particularly more lacking in these ISC activities. This page is about ISC recommendation that I already mentioned, and these 3 recommendations seem to be undeniable, and everybody agree about these directions. And I also agree with them, but I think they are not good, but not fitable to utilize as an analytic framework of ISC application in practice. So I made my conceptual model of ISC for reviewing the Korean ISC application. Before that, first of all, I want to tell you that we need to recognize that there are 3 different and sometimes conflicting perspectives on ISC. First perspective is traditional perspective developed in trade policy. In this perspective, we are more concerned about regulatory harmonization. And we like to reduce regulatory compliance and implement cost. And lots of work by WTO can be categorized into this perspective. Second perspective is about competition in new technologies and new industries, such as AI, self-driving technology, electronic mobiles, automobiles, robots, and lots of fintech. With this perspective, I use the term of ISC as an international regulatory competition, that cooperation. With this perspective, we're focusing on enhancing our country institutional competitiveness over other countries, which will result in enhanced industrial management competitiveness advantages. Last perspective is considering ISC as a tool for increasing regulatory policy quality. That's the idea of OECD report and OECD recommendation, I think. In this perspective, more interest are put on the effectiveness of regulatory policy, not cost. Idea of global environment regulation is the best example of this perspective. What I want to tell you there is that this diverse and sometimes comprehensive perspective is that you need to consider the ISC in practical policy process. Everyone says ISC, but lots of persons have different ideas. They want to be a top leader of the new technology. Somebody wants to some principal approach. Yeah, we need to make a comprehensive and general conceptual model for understanding ISC, despite this diverse purpose and background. This is my theoretical modeling of ISC consideration of ISC activities, ISC infrastructure. Very complicated, but yeah. Despite of diverse backgrounds and purpose, we need to design the better ISC framework for better achievement and effectiveness through ISC. ISC framework consists with 16 types of ISC activities in my model, which are categorized by cooperative relation types and cooperative targets and approaches. For example, now we are joining a meeting of plurilateral type of relation organized by an intergovernmental organization of ASEAN, OECD, and this meeting is not for individual specific regulatory policy or not intended to develop specific regulatory management system. So I can categorize my business trip to Bangkok this time into a number of 12 type of activity, okay? And about the ISC infrastructure, I split the 2 type of infrastructure. One is the defining and explaining procedure, which is usually conducted by institutional stipulation of ISC. And the other infrastructure is governance and resources, which is related with an organization and manpower of ISC operation. Now we move on to empirical analysis of ISC application in Korean regulatory policy system. First thing is about the current legislation of regulatory management on ISC. I used to say to my foreign countries colleagues that Korean regulatory policy management have drastically changed it after establishment of Basic Act on Administrative Regulations in 1997. And it still gives a legal basis for most regulatory policy management principles and tools. However, there is not any article and any word related to IIC, no international word. Though we adopted a comparison with other countries' regulation while doing real process, but it's just included in the guidelines, not legal institution. Recently, a couple of legislations stipulate explicitly the term of IIC, but it's not a general thing. Next, I have checked diverse results of IS activities and results. First thing is I analyzed FTA statements. I have reviewed 21 statements with 59 countries. I cannot tell you that there is some consistent tendency, but I can tell you that recently there can be found more articles on participation in developing regulations, and agreements on specific trade policy related regulations are expanded into more agreements on more general government regulations or more general administrative intervention. Second thing is analysis of specific international treaties document. I checked almost 3,500 treaties from 1948. Years of construction of the current Korean government. Based on the result of the analysis, I found that there is a typical matching of cooperative relation type with a certain policy area. I mean, for example, plurilateral relation with IC or international government organizations are found more in treaties of science and technology policy. On the contrary, bilateral relations are more found in treaties of administrative and judiciary policy. Only two analyses are about the legislative result of ISC, I think. On the contrary, these two analyses are related with the legislative process of ISC. Number three is on the analysis of activity statement with the Korean government. While doing this analysis, I focused on the direction of influence already with raising the STC, which means specific trade concerns. I calculated the ratio of STC raised by a certain country or raised towards that country. Korea shows 3.8 times of STC raised by over raised to, which means at least activities, Korea government is focusing more on revising other countries' legislation, not its own. Number four, fourth analysis is on the analysis of RIA statements. Yeah, I have checked. I still related this with the four type of things such as comparison review with other countries. Out of 887 RIA statements, 36% statements are found to be related. 1/3 were related with IS activities. However, most cases are checked by the category of comparison review. Which is usually considered as a unilateral type of literature reviews, kind of. And in addition, only 50% of ISC-related RIA statements, which is only 5.6% of total RIA statements, have explained the background of regulatory development in connection with the IIC approach. Lastly, I checked the ISC programs which are included in the annual report of Korean regulatory reform. Contrary to early analysis, these programs are categorized into ISC activities on regulatory policy management, not specific regulatory policy. In this section, I'd like to share 3 cases of ISC which are mostly directly related with the regulatory reform. First case is participation of fund project of UK in 2014 and 2015. With this program, Korea government has a chance to consult with several UK regulatory agencies and oversight agencies. I visited London and about operating 1 in 2 hour system at that time, which helped to adoption of our cost-in-cost-out system in Korea. Second case is KIPA and OCS capacity building workshop on regulatory reform, which has launched from 2018. Act 77 at the time, the Thai government has considered adopting the RIA in regulatory policy management, and I understand that this cooperative workshop between Korea and Thai government helped to establish and operate the Act 70 Act, right? Yeah. And I really hope that this cooperative relationship will be continued more expanded. Last case is regulatory challenge program in 2012 and 2021. It is categorized into a unilateral type of IRC, but it's quite particular in that this is one of tools of regulatory reform using IRC approach. It's quite similar, but as Korea is one of the most sensitive countries to global standards because of very high dependency on international trade for national economic development. So there have been massive requests from business to reduce some kind of Galapagos regulation, which means regulations that are not in Korea or more severe than other countries. Regulatory challenge program is for identifying and reforming this Galapagos regulation in 2021. In addition to the analysis of legal institution and written documents, I did a survey research because important thing is a man. So survey research of Korean public officials is because as part of IRC infrastructure, we need to know about the capacity and attitude of public officials. First question was on the recognition of IRC concept, but 50% of public officials doing a job related to regulatory policy said, I never heard of it. Lack of recognition is the foremost problem, I think. Next, I asked if they knew about international standard or reference for their regulatory policy work, and almost 2/3 said yes. But 2/3 of the respondents said their workload on IRC is just under 5%. In particular, 30% of respondents says no workload on IRC. It means IRC workload might be concentrated on few people, or most of public officials might not consider IRC work as their ordinary work. Yeah. Regarding with some obstacles, limitations of IRC work, most respondents said that IRC work is not reflected on their personal work evaluation system. IRC work is used to consider as extra work, and institutional or practical support for the IRC work is not provided. Yeah.
Mr. Lee, due to the time constraint, you may need to wrap up a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to the issues of applying IRC in Korea. Yeah, I got 2 issues about the IRC application to share with you. First issue is on the IRC governance. Who will be in charge of the whole government IRC work? What I want to point is that there's some conflict between the regulatory management oversight body and Department of Trade Policy or Department of Standardization Department. Second issue is on the level or method of IRC application in existing regulatory management system. Yeah, I got a lot of issues. I got a lot of suggested agendas in my 300 paper, but yeah, I want to share these agendas, and we discuss more about practical issues on applying IRC in our regulatory policy management. Thank you.
Much appreciate, Dr. Lee, for your analysis on diverse perspective of the IRC and its application in Korea regulatory system. Continuing our journey through the diverse landscape of regulatory practices, it's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Marbida. She plays a vital role in shaping regulatory landscape in the Philippines, particularly through her work with the Anti-Red Tape Authority, or ARTA. Today, Ms. Marbida will present the update updates on the national policy on the regulatory management system in the Philippines, as well as other initiatives aimed at easing the processes of doing business in the Philippines. So, Ms. Marbina, we are eager to hear about the developments in your country and lessons we can draw from them. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. So like what our facilitators mentioned, I will be sharing with you about the updates on the national policy regulatory management system and also the other ease of doing business initiatives in the Philippines. So the Anti-Red Tape Authority So the ARTA, we are mandated to lead the charge in promoting ease of doing business in the Philippines. And the law that made ARTA, which is RA 11032, grants it with twin mandates. So we have an empowerment mandate and also an enforcement mandate. So in terms of empowerment, we have policies, we have guidelines, and we also have programs that facilitate the simplification of processes in the government. We aim to help our regulatory agencies in the reduction of burdensome requirements and the adoption of technology. We also have our enforcement mandate, so we hold government agencies accountable for their actions, and we ensure compliance with the law. So we recognize that in order for government agencies to comply with the law, we need to capacitate them with good regulatory practices. So in ARTA, we have 5 core trusts, and I will be going through them, discussing them one by one. So the first one is on digitalization of services. So here, one of the challenges of new businesses in the Philippines before was the need to go to a lot of government agencies in order to register their business. So we created this Philippine Business Hub, and we aim for it to be a one-stop portal for business registrations. And through this portal, the number of steps involved in the registration process has been significantly reduced from 33 days to 3 days, and then the number of steps from 13 steps to 6 steps. We also have this electronic business one-stop shop. So one of the challenges also of businesses in the Philippines is that they have a hard time dealing with local government units. This is the equivalent of the state governments in other jurisdictions. So there are issues of varying requirements, varying fees, and also some opportunistic officials within those local governments. So we hope to address these concerns through the establishment of this electronic business one-stop shop, where they can submit their application online, they can reduce the need for physical visits, simplify the process, and save valuable time and resources. So as you can see, 627 out of 1,634 LGUs are compliant with the automation requirement. We have a long way to go, but there are very promising results for the fully automated LGUs. So as you can see, on the screen, these are samples of LGUs that have fully automated their business registration process. And they saw a collective increase in business registrations and revenue collection for the periods of 2021 to 2022. So this is something that we aim to also roll out to other local government units. Earlier, Mark was saying that in New Zealand, it takes 30 minutes to register or to get the business permit. Recently, we received a directive from the president to check if it's possible for the business permit to be issued in 10 minutes. So when I heard Mark, I was like, oh, maybe I can use that reasoning when I go back to the country. But then Madam Siti mentioned that in Malaysia, it only takes them 1 minute. Yeah, but like what Mark mentioned earlier, we also need to look at whether or not we collect quality information. So that's also something that we would consider, because right now we are doing business process mapping on whether it's really possible for 10 minutes to be the new norm. Okay, so the next core thrust is securing compliance. So the ARTA endeavors to really identify bottlenecks and redundancies in the bureaucracy. And in order to secure compliance, we also have the Citizens Charter. So this is one of the basic requirements in our law, which provides the list of services offered by the agency with their corresponding requirements. So this takes inspiration from other developed countries like the United Kingdom. So here, no agency can require additional requirements or take a longer processing time other than what is stated in the document. This may seem very simple, but this created a huge difference in the interaction of our citizens and our businesses with the government, because it increased the predictability in terms of the process and what they expect to undergo when they interact with the government. So this is something that we really focus on. We teach agencies how to write Citizens Charter. And we also monitor their updating of the Citizens Charter. We also have the Report Card Survey 2.0. So every time a citizen or a business would interact with the government, the ARTA would also conduct a report card survey. So this is a way for us to obtain feedback on how provisions in the Citizens Charter and provisions of the EODB Act are being followed and how the agency is performing. So this is an input also to the continuous improvement of our agencies. Third, we have legal and public assistance. So we provide necessary support to our citizens while they are navigating the complex regulatory landscape in the country. So we have this email address, complaints@arta.gov.ph. I think it's the most active email address in the Philippines. We receive a lot of emails from people. And then we also have our hotline and the 8888. And here, in our agency's legal and public assistance trust, we encourage citizens and businesses to communicate with us if they encounter any government agency that violates the service standards set by the law. So as of August 2023, we have received 16,099 complaints, and our closure rate is 98.75%. Next, mapping and streamlining processes. So we receive those complaints, and a way for us to resolve the complaints is to really work with stakeholders and conduct mapping and streamlining of processes. So to help agencies conduct mapping and streamlining, the ARTA, with the help of our development partners, have developed guidelines and circulars that serve as valuable references for agencies in re-engineering their services. So our intention here is to have processes and systems continuously reviewed and optimized to reduce burdens and costs. So we have all of these references on business process mapping, whole of government re-engineering, and also the engineering of business permits and licensing systems. Okay, and then last but not the least, we put particular importance in being a steward within the Philippine bureaucracy to improve quality of regulation, because the foundation of any efficient and transparent government lies in the quality of its regulations. So our initiative is in line with the socioeconomic agenda of the current administration on bureaucratic efficiency. So an efficient government will accelerate the attainment of the other points of the administration's socioeconomic agenda. And we are anchored on the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028 to promote competition and improve regulatory efficiency. So prior to the ARTA and prior to RE 11032, this is the regulatory process flow for regulatory agencies in the Philippines. The drafting, assessment, and post-implementation review of regulations were left to the regulating agency, and that resulted to regulators operating in silos without due consideration of other factors that affect different stakeholders of the regulations. So recognizing that challenge or that problem, we aim to improve regulations. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So as what was mentioned by the other panelists earlier, as regulators, our role is to stimulate economic activity while also protecting the interests of the greater society. So the law requires agencies to implement regulations that are fit for purpose and do not create undue regulatory burden. And we recognize that in order for us to have an effective regulatory management system, we need to establish institutions, policies, processes, and also capacitate people. So in the Anti-Red Tape Authority, we have this national policy on regulatory management system. We also have the Philippine Good Regulatory Principles. Like the other ASEAN and OECD economies, we also are starting with regulatory impact assessment of proposed and existing regulations, and we also have Philippine Business Regulations Information System. So we need to capacitate agencies in the Philippines. As of now, we have capacitated 236 agencies and 1,793 civil servants, and that is a continuing effort. And we have been very lucky to have other countries to learn from. So we learned from the MPC, we learned from the Office of Best Practice Regulation, we learned from other Philippine agencies, and we also have this very crucial document, the OECD assessment on how we conduct regulatory impact assessment. So just like the other countries, and being new in this GRP game was an advantage to the Philippines, since we were able to glean from the experiences and lessons of other countries. So this is our Philippine Good Regulatory Principles, which anchors on the ASEAN Good Regulatory Principles and also the OECD GRPs. And on the NPRMS, this is a quite recent development. This only became effective last year, 17th of December last year. And here we aim to promote the adoption of a systematized management of regulations in the Philippines and provide a common framework on good regulatory practices. So I'm not sure if you can see it clearly, but you might have the presentation. But I particularly liked how Daniel had that metaphor of regulatory policy being the unwanted child in the government.
So Ms. Marminamini, you need to wrap that up in 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we also have that kind of metaphor in the Philippines. Right now, the development of regulations is like the firstborn. Everyone focuses on the performance of the firstborn. Implementation of regulations is like the middle child. No one really cares what they do. And then monitoring and evaluation and ex post review, they usually get away with it, like people don't really. So in this NPRMS model of the Philippines, we have this life cycle approach that recognizes that equal attention must be given to all stages in the life of the regulation, from forward planning, from development and assessment, to implementation, evaluation, and review, and to its possible amendment and repeal. So this is something that we are really trying to roll out to government agencies in the Philippines. And then lastly, we also have the Philippine Business Regulations Information System, which is our repository of regulations in the Philippines, and also the Anti-Red Tape Electronic Management Information System, or Artemis. So We acknowledge that we cannot really implement all these reforms instantaneously, and we are guided by the 6-year change management. So for the past few years, we have been focusing on establishing the structures and the resources necessary. And by next year, we are anticipating to be transitioning to the storming stage, where we address resistance and challenges from agencies and stakeholders. And hopefully, in the next few years, we move towards greater cooperation and alignment in terms of good regulatory practices. So that's it for me, and that's what the Anti-Red Tape Authority is doing in terms of GRP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bramina, for your enlightening presentation. I think ARTA multifaceted approach to streamlining business processes in the Philippines is really impressive. Now, with the completion of the insightful presentations, we now move to a crucial segment of our roundtable discussion, the open floor. So this is the opportunities to any delegates and participants to ask questions to the presenters or add any additional perspective from your respective country. So if you wish to do so, please signal your intention. We have time for a few questions. Okay, please.
Hello, I'm Prangtip from the Division of Natural Resources and the Environment Division from the OCS, the co-host. I would like to share Thailand's experience, but on a more substantive perspective to complement Ms. Jaisai's presentation earlier. So actually, environmental participation has been recognized as a right by the Constitution since 1997 in Thailand, and recent reforms and amendments in Thailand since have been in this direction. For example, the new National Park Act of 2019 has amended a provision about the creation of national parks. So now public hearing has become compulsory before national park creations, for example. And Community Forest Act 2019 also has created a legal framework where legal communities manage public forests with a decision-making body composed of people, the community, for example. The Fisheries Ordinance of 2018 also put some representatives from local fishing communities in the Provincial Fisheries Committee, who also have regulatory making power. Actually, in my experience, in the environmental area is a little bit controversial and very sensitive, because a lot of Thai people still rely on natural resources exploitation for a living. So public participation that does align with people's interests, the law or law amendment or regulation that align with people's interests is no problem. But most of the time, I would say that people's interests go against regulatory effort. I would like to say that since the new National Park Act has entered into force, no new national park has been created in Thailand at all. And And there was an effort to create a new national park in Prachuap Khiri Khan called ASEAN. Got Sing, Got Sang, Got Halu. At first, the line that surround the new national park would be like, I don't remember exactly, but 2 or 3 kilometers surrounded the 3 islands. But under pressure of local fishermen communities, finally the line was agreed at 300 meters from the beach, for example. So the same problem went with the Community Forest Act. There was a implementing regulation which was to be issued under the Act, which forbid the creation of community forest in some area, like for example, environmental areas that have provisions might the power of community forest committees, and should be that there should be implementation problem in the future. So finally, that draft regulation still on hold now after 3 or 4 years of effort to publish this regulation, because the communities disagree to it. And also the fisheries ordinance, there was a provision that prohibit the use of net that is, small nets that allow to catch small fish at night with light to prevent fishermen from catching juvenile fish and aquatic animals. There have been an effort to amend that provision in the fishery ordinance, and Thai fishermen argue that at 12 sea miles, far in the sea, there should be an exception so they can fish at night with a smaller, tighter net. So all the experience have shown that when there have been resistance from local communities or conflicting arguments from the stakeholders, Thai government tend to give in, and stakeholders who exploit natural resources often have more financial power, they are more active, and they have more influence on the MP than the NGO. So fish, coral reef, trees, animals, they do not speak for themselves, but stakeholders who fight for a living, they speak louder, actually. Okay, sorry. So to sum up, I think that in Thailand, this has been quite a problem, and Thai government should have more data to support their counter arguments.
Thank you very much for sharing your valuable insight into the practical issues of Thailand's environmental participation. So let's hear from another participant over there, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Nasudara Tamani. I'm from Thammasat University, Faculty of Law. So I have a quick questions about the pain point that representative of Thailand just mentioned that. I heard that we experienced the efficiency and effectiveness pain point about the RIA. So I just wonder, from your perspective, from other countries' representatives, do you also experience the same things that we experience? And whether you consider RIA as a pain point in your countries, and if you feel the same way, how can you tackle that issues or problems? Thank you.
Is this question for me or for other? Sorry, I'm just. Well, I think one of the key differences that we OCS or the government has done differently in the past than in the past 30 years is that we finally formalized the requirements. So before that, it was just a cabinet resolution, so a resolution by the cabinet that's been carried on through different governments that if you're proposing a draft legislation, you need to do some form of impact analysis. It didn't even have the name RIA at that time. So there was not a lot of kind of effort that went into capacity building or really implementing or building a RIA culture within the Thai agencies. And another important part was consultation wasn't taken as seriously as now. It was treated as kind of a checkbox activity. And also, I think government back in the days, you didn't have as much access to kind of utilize internet. So the reach that you need to go to the people, to the stakeholders, would require more budget, so to speak. So I think that's one of the key difference. One of the criticism that the office originally kind of received a lot was there was no kind of punishment, so to speak, in the legislation when you don't. What happens if you don't have RIA with your draft legislation? And I don't think there needs to be a punishment, but you can't propose. You can't have that draft, and it's not going through cabinet, and I think that's enough kind of a measure within the process. There's no need to have kind of a hard-handed stick type of measure within this type of rules. Yeah.
Thank you very much for. Please.
If I may quickly react, from my experience, before joining the OECD, I was responsible for implementing RIA in the Czech administration, and I'm proud to say I was one of the most hated people in the administration. And when I got the offer from the OECD, I think many people were celebrating actually with some champagne, because it's not unique to Thailand. Many people perceived good regulatory practices, and RIA in particular, as additional regulatory burdens. But our answer is always, by defining the objectives, by thinking about the problem, by thinking about different alternative solutions and thinking which one might be the best one, you're just doing your job properly. So nobody should say this is just a burden, because it's about the quality of everyone's work. I met with people who were drafting regulations, and they said, but we don't know how many businesses are actually active in the sector we are trying to regulate. And immediately the response was, but how can you even think about regulating the sector without knowing the number, at least an approximate number of businesses operating in this sector? This doesn't make any sense. So go back, do your homework, and then think about whether it's necessary to regulate it or not. I think it was your colleague, Mark Jonathan Aito, who once said that RIA is a little bit like oil drilling. You do a lot of test drills, and in most of the cases, you don't find anything. But then 1 out of 100 times, you find something, and that makes you rich. And that's very similar with RIA. Many cases, you don't find any alternative solutions, but in some cases it can lead to some significant savings, or you can prevent scandals, you can prevent people protesting again in front of the government office or the presidential office, whatever you have in your country, because you just didn't make things right and you didn't consult properly. And last comment, if I may, I'm sorry for being too long, is about stakeholder engagement. We always say in the OECD, stakeholder engagement is not a referendum. It's to collect diverse views, and it's government's responsibility to reach out to those that might be less active and might have less resources. You're right, you cannot consult trees or you cannot consult rivers or fish, but there are environmental NGOs and they should definitely play a role in this process, and it's government's responsibility to reach out to them and consult with them. I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your invaluable response. I do have one very quick questions and maybe the final questions to Mr. Trnka about the issues that presented today. In the face of global challenges like digital transformation or the climate change, how do you envision regulatory practices in Thailand or other similar economies look like in the near future?
Well, I think, and I'll try to be brief, but I think first of all, we will use more and more technologies in the regulation making process. And I've already mentioned that artificial intelligence has a huge potential in regulating, in analyzing impacts, in collecting inputs from stakeholders. That's one thing I see. The other thing is government will always have a pacing problem because technologies are now developing so quickly that just we cannot keep up with those changes. That's why we need to be what we call more agile. It might be a fancy word, but that basically means maybe we will not make things right the first time, so let's get back to them. Let's review systematically, regularly, our regulations, whether they are still fit for purpose, whether they are performing. And don't be ashamed to admit that maybe you were wrong 2 years ago when you drafted the regulation. It doesn't work, so it needs to be adjusted. Many new business startups, actually most of business startups will fail. So why governments do not have a right to fail, basically? All regulations are experiments. We need to really gather as much information and data as we can and adjust what is possible to be adjusted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, as we watch the clock and recognize the time constraint, it's become apparent that our rich discussion must draw to close. As we conclude, I would like to extend my appreciation to all speakers and delegates and also participants for your invaluable contribution today. And their perspective shared today not only enrich our collective understanding, but also strengthen our efforts in advancing good regulatory practices in our region. And it's time for me to close this session and pass the baton back to the chair. So I would like to invite the co-chair from New Zealand to share your reflection and closing remark, please.
Thank you, Dr. Thoming Sok. I think that we've heard a very rich and diverse selection of experiences and insights during the course of today. Probably the single most striking conclusion is that if you want to be popular, working on better regulation is not for you. And I really would like to reiterate the comments that Daniel just made, is that yes, work on better regulation in general, not just regulatory impact assessment, will often be seen by many of our colleagues across government as a pain point because it is exposing weaknesses and capability gaps in the ability of the public sector to do its job. And that is still very much the case in New Zealand. It's still very much the case in other OECD countries as well. And the more that we engage with groups that have been traditionally left out of the process, the harder some of the choices do become. In New Zealand, sometimes we have had to resort to creating new institutions to make sure that some voices are heard. For instance, one of our commenters from the floor just raised the issue of who speaks for the environment. In New Zealand and in some other OECD countries, we have actually created a Commissioner for the Environment that reports directly to our Parliament, so that we have greater assurance that there is a voice that speaks for the environment, as well as a voice that speaks for those communities that make their living from the environment as well. So investment in better quality regulation doesn't necessarily lead to easy choices. We hope, though, that what it does lead to is better choices, and that is our role in presenting the choices to ministers. In the end, these choices are for governments to make. It's our role to make the choices as clear and as well informed as possible, and I think that many of the presentations and the discussion today have been a material contribution to that process, and I look forward tomorrow to continuing the discussion with some of our Thai colleagues here, along with my OECD colleagues. So I would like to thank all delegates and all participants for participating in this year's GRPN meeting. We look forward to the opportunity to continue to meet in person next year, pandemics permitting, and we also will be looking to take some initiatives between meetings in the coming year as well, perhaps to address some of those questions of capability and priorities which have recurred throughout today's discussions. Thank you, and I will hand over to Madam Siti.
I don't have much to add. Mark has said it all, basically. But I'd just like to thank everybody for their participation today. It's been a long day, lots to take in, so please go back and look at the slides and see where you can learn from, maybe some of the things you would like to share in the next GRPN. Before we end, obviously, the OECD would like to evaluate the effectiveness of the sessions. So we have a interactive survey, I think. They'll be shown on the screen. Okay. So please scan your phone's barcode. There are several questions being asked. Indicate your response to the questions. Okay. Has anybody signed up to the Menti meter? Okay. All right. Okay. So there are several questions. Please respond to them, and we will see the results eventually, hopefully. Okay. All right, I think that's about it. Okay, so there's also a question, an open-ended question on how do you think the GRP meeting should be improved? So this, unfortunately, you have to type in your response. So we will be collecting the responses and see how we can improve the sessions in the future. Okay, yes. Okay. Yep, that's it. All right. So again, thank you very much. The meeting is not a presentation. It's a collaborative effort from everybody, the presenters, the OAC. Thank you very much for organizing it. Government of Thailand, our colleagues from the UK, OECD, obviously. So thank you very much for your participation, and God willing, we shall meet again next year. But as Mark mentioned, we will also be touching base with some of you on improvements or planning for a future GRP. And thank you very much from both of us. Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Bye.
Thank you, Chair. So our meeting has come to an end, and I would like to invite Kun Jintapan Thangsobut to give our closing remarks. He's the director of our Law Reform Division from the OCS. Thank you.
on behalf of the Office of Council of State, I would like to give my sincere appreciation for everyone to come to make an effort to coming here today. I would like to thanks for your attending guests, especially from Thai government agency and other stakeholders. In our perspective, better regulation is a journey, not the destination in itself. I hope that the presentation and discussion today will inspire you to work together to achieve our shared goal, that better regulation will result in better life of the people and the betterment of the society. We are looking forward to contributing to the development of ASEAN-OECD GRPN network for many more years to come. สวัสดีครับ ขอบคุณครับ